Hello, hello, everybody. See, we got a couple of attendees coming in. How's it going? All right. How's it going, everybody? We'll give people a few minutes to join. But it's good to see some people already coming in, filling up quick. All right, let's get to a few more attendees, then I'll start things. All right. So, welcome to the first ever Metadata Customer Webinar. I'm Kevin Joyce, Senior Customer Success Manager at Metadata.io. I've been at the company coming up on 3 years this July, and I'm excited to share with you some of my hacks and best practices concerning audiences. So let's get into it. During this webinar, we will cover the types of metadata audiences, their uses, and some best practices and tips. We'll also make sure that we leave enough time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. Want to get this, have this be interactive, and if you came with some questions, we'll try to answer them as best we can. So, diving in. There are two different types of metadata audiences, and if you're running campaigns yourself on the platform, I'm sure you're already aware of this. But we have MetaMatch and native targeting. So native audiences use the social channels data to target prospects, while MetaMatch uses a variety of third-party data sources to find the right people. With MetaMatch and our database of 1.5 billion, that's billion with a B, records, we're able to match personal and business emails to profiles on Facebook and LinkedIn. The match rates differ on either channel, with Facebook matching between 20 and 40%, give or take, and LinkedIn matching anywhere between 50 and 70%. Usually depends on the regions and what you're targeting, types of audiences, the people within them. Keep these match rates in mind when creating audiences and seeing what the estimated number of contacts are before creating it. So if you're familiar with the platform and you're running your own audiences, you'll see like an estimated number in the top right. That is the number of people in the database, not quite the matched profiles. So always keep that fraction of what the match rate is in mind when you see that number. Firmographic audiences are probably the most commonly used audiences on the platform. Within a firmographic audience, you can test MetaMatch, LinkedIn native, or Facebook native. Although I would never recommend somebody using the Facebook native targeting. That's why we have the finger wagging right there. Many of you bought metadata just to avoid using Facebook audiences, native audiences. So we just have it in case you want to test it out, or if you want to group them, but we'll get into that later. All right, firmographic MetaMatch. For firmographic MetaMatch audiences, you could target the same individuals on Facebook that you can target on LinkedIn. With these audiences, quality on Facebook does not suffer. Big misconception that the leads that you get on Facebook might not be as good as the leads that you get on LinkedIn. If you're using MetaMatch audiences, they could often be the same individual on both channels. And even if you have a high CPL on Facebook, I bet you that a lot of those leads will still convert into opportunities, whether influenced or triggered. When using the firmographic MetaMatch audiences, or pretty much any MetaMatch audiences, I always recommend using keywords as job titles instead of the full job titles to boost your audience size. You can always exclude keywords if you find that your audience preview could use a little tweaking, but it's better to start broad with just like marketing, sales, or IT as a job title rather than director of sales and marketing, because when you have that long string title, it's looking for a match of director of sales and marketing in one person's record. But it might be more effective to do sales, marketing, and then layer on director in seniority. And remember, never create an audience that looks for job titles and job functions within the same file. You'll end up excluding too many people that could be the right fit. And this goes the same for combining company revenue and employee size. I like to do one audience that's usually company revenue, another audience that's employee size, and then group them after they're done matching. Firmographic native targeting. So this uses LinkedIn's data. It's pretty much the same audiences that you would build if you were running campaigns natively in LinkedIn. So when you're typing in job titles, you have a finite list of the titles that you can choose. Same thing with job functions. But one of the benefits of these is it's ready to use once created. So it's great for getting campaigns running quickly. With MetaMatch audiences, you need to wait 48 hours for them to match on LinkedIn, and a few hours for them to match on Facebook. But with the firmographic native targeting, once you click create audience, that'll be ready to go. You can also target up to 100 companies without needing to wait 48 hours as well. So if you have a very small list of target accounts, and hopefully that these would be pretty large companies, but you can manually enter each company name here up to 100 companies. And it's a good alternative to account list uploads. You can also target by member groups and LinkedIn skills in these audiences. And I've found that to be a pretty good alternative audience to use if you're just looking to diversify who you're reaching. Let's jump into technographics. So there are two data sources when it comes to technographic audiences, Aberdeen and HG Insights. For Aberdeen, this is included in all metadata offerings. You can, for the entire contract term, you can create as many Aberdeen technographic audiences as you'd like. And it's used to target your competitors' customers or finding prospects that use complementary technologies. For example, metadata works well with HubSpot or Marketo users. And so I can build an audience that targets users of those platforms simultaneously. HG Insights functions the same way that Aberdeen does. It's just a different data source. I found that this data source is a bit larger and has a higher match rate on the channels. So I always try to use HG Insights audiences if I can. All metadata customers have a 90-day free trial that they can take advantage of for HG Insights. And I really recommend doing so. And if you like the results that you're getting, you can get a pretty good discount if you buy the data through Metadata. You're limited to just building the audiences in our platform, but I think it's a pretty good deal regardless. So talk to your CSM about starting that trial or going the next step and making the purchase if you like. Also, just a pro tip, if you need to target companies that use two technologies, use product group 2 to layer one on top of the other. So for this example, we're looking at companies that use Shopify and HubSpot. If I were to put HubSpot up here in product group 1, I'd be looking at Shopify or HubSpot. You can also still layer on the company firmographics and persona filters as you would for any other meta match audience. Let's move on to ABM and contactless. So metadata also supports target account lists and contact list uploads. Keep in mind that metadata does not support contact list uploads through Salesforce just yet. We just do account and opportunity-based lists. Contact list uploads. These are great if you're trying to re-engage a large list of people in your marketing automation tool or in Salesforce, and you can export that file into a CSV. Or if you have access to a tool like ZoomInfo, and you can export a list of emails through that tool. Keep in mind that you should not be uploading lists that just barely make the channel minimums. You have up to 300,000 records that you can import. And as most of you are probably aware, the bigger your audience, the lower your CPMs, the lower your cost per lead. So unless these people are really engaged with your brand and you can pay a premium for cost per lead, avoid getting really small audiences for contact lists. Also, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll address them again in the Q&A. But yeah, if you don't want to forget it, type it out now. Account list uploads for MetaMatch. So for account list uploads with MetaMatch, we recommend importing lists of 500 plus companies to get a decent size. Otherwise, you'll need to refresh that list or serve these audiences new content more frequently. A lot of times we'll get these lists from salespeople and they'll have, their top 10 companies that they want to close. And it's always, the biggest companies that everybody else in the world wants to close. So push back on sales about refining this, or at least putting some thought into why this company might be a good fit for them. And when you're uploading these lists of companies, always download the template here to avoid any uploading errors. And always double check the domains that you're including. If you're getting leads from outside of your target accounts, but you're using a target account list, it could very well be that you have a mismatch of domains in that file. And if it is a couple thousand companies, it could be hard to keep track of, but it is important to every once in a while go through and double check that all the domains are exactly right. Yes, the recording will be distributed after. All right. Account list uploads for native. So these still take 48 hours to match, just like you would if you uploaded an account list into Salesforce or into LinkedIn. It's a good alternative if your MetaMatch audience is too small and you want to try this one out. Uses LinkedIn's native data, but avoid layering firmographic filters. So again, I wouldn't upload a list of target accounts and then layer on certain industries or certain employee ranges. At that point, you should already have refined that list to be everybody who you want to target. So, uploading a target account list and then saying we don't want companies that are too small, you might as well just clean it up before you upload it. Moving on to Salesforce account opportunity audiences. For Salesforce account opportunity audiences, you need Salesforce integrated. You can always import a list of companies from Salesforce just like you would an account list, but to get this specific view where you can create Salesforce audiences, you need Salesforce. Here you could target people based on particular account or opportunity fields, like all opportunities that are closed lost or accounts whose type equals prospect. If you have, or you could also use view lists that you save in Salesforce and target those in metadata. Moving on to intent. As many of you may know, we also offer the ability to create audiences from intent sources like G2 and Bombora. G2 audiences can run dynamically in LinkedIn native and through MetaMatch on both Facebook and LinkedIn. Bombora audiences can run through MetaMatch on Facebook and LinkedIn, but not LinkedIn native. So it uses the MetaMatch data set to create those audiences. If you've ever been my customer, you probably know that, or you've probably heard me say that G2 and Bombora are like high octane fuel for a sports car. It's just really good intent audiences, and metadata is the sports car, and it'll get you to where you need to go fast. Reach out to your CSM to activate this data if you have a current subscription, or if you need to talk to a representative from one of these companies, we'd happily introduce you. Moving on to the last audience type, retargeting. Pretty important one. These audiences are created in your Facebook and LinkedIn ad accounts. Every page that you want to retarget needs the corresponding ad accounts pixel placed on those pages. So if your company has multiple domains associated with it, you need to have a singular ad accounts pixel placed on the back end of those multiple domains. Also keep in mind that these audiences won't be ready the moment that you place the pixel. It needs traffic to match the profiles, and so that means that you need people visiting your site pretty frequently. So if you're ever planning on launching a campaign that's using a retargeting audience, but you haven't yet set up those audiences in Facebook or LinkedIn, you may need to push back your launch date. These audiences are ideal for bottom funnel campaigns like free trials or demo requests. They're good for content campaigns as well, but specifically for those types of campaigns, you're going to want to use retargeting audiences. I always liken pairing a firmographic audience with a demo request ad. So these are people that don't know who your brand is, and you're asking them to talk to sales. It's like asking someone to marry you on a first date. If they don't know who you are, do you think they'll commit to a meeting like that? So I like to create retargeting audiences that are not just homepage retargeting, but people that are visiting other pages on the site, and they're actively trying to learn more about what you're offering, and they're not just getting to the homepage and bouncing, or they're not going straight to the careers page. Those are people that you're going to want to exclude sometimes. But let's move on to some best practices. So found that GIF, best practices soccer team, I guess. I don't know. Here I want to go over some notes around dynamic audiences, audience groups, retargeting, and measuring performance. Dynamic audiences. So dynamic audiences are available for both LinkedIn and Facebook. This is a new feature in terms of dynamic on Facebook. Previously, it was just available for LinkedIn, and those dynamic Facebook audiences are for G2. The use case for dynamic audiences is for when you have a target list or an exclusion that's being updated frequently, making it difficult to constantly re-upload lists to metadata and waiting for them to match and relaunching campaigns and just that start-stop motion. If you want to have something that's dynamically changing, this is a great tool to use. So this is where you would find the dynamic audiences in metadata. They're labeled bright green dynamic, hard to miss. Keep in mind that the top two audiences are account-based only for LinkedIn, whereas the bottom one is a contact list only for Facebook. We also have the static G2, which goes to both Facebook and LinkedIn. For dynamic audiences, ones that are focusing on the LinkedIn native type, there's a big difference between job function and job title audiences. And I recommend using job function to get a larger reach. So for example, here we have a job title audience for information technology. I selected all available titles in LinkedIn's dropdown. I got 7.2 million people. Whereas firmographic audiences that are job function audiences that focused on information technology, I got 14 million people. And unlike MetaMatch audiences, you cannot combine a dynamic or any LinkedIn native audiences, especially if it's two or one that's job function and one that is a job title audience. You'll get this error message saying that you cannot group it. Also keep in mind that when you're using dynamic LinkedIn native audiences, that data is not perfect either. You definitely have some really high quality data on LinkedIn, but it's still best to test the static MetaMatch audiences to see which has higher quality. Just for a quick example, I looked up on LinkedIn the CEO of Coca-Cola, and I had no idea that Coca-Cola had so many CEOs, but I guess, it's just the nature of self-selecting your job title and social media. So keep that stuff in mind. Moving on to best practices for audience groups. Oh, let me just answer that question about G2. So I think it's right here. The dynamic G2 LinkedIn native targeting, this is an account list upload that is only going to LinkedIn. And the dynamic G2 intent data at the bottom, this new one, this is a contact list that is only going to Facebook. Hope that clears it up for you. This was so new that I had to update the deck this morning and add a couple different notes. When I was doing the deck yesterday, this module wasn't here. So very new feature, and I recommend if you have a G2 subscription to test it out. But let's go back to audience groups. Yeah. So why and how should you use audience groups? Grouping audiences lowers the overall costs and limits the number of experiments. When you have a bigger pool of people, your CPMs go down. When you have fewer experiments, not saying that you should always be experimenting, but sometimes it may not be worth experimenting certain things. But the fewer number of experiments, the less you'll spend in a day. I recommend grouping audiences of the same type. So pairing a firmographic with another firmographic, or a marketing persona with other marketing personas that might be in different audience types. I like to segment it this way because it simplifies reporting when you need to isolate the naming conventions. When you group an audience, you'll have to rename it, and that new name will be part of the experiment string. So if you've ever been in metadata and you look at the experiments, it looks like this really long string of gibberish. But depending on what you name your audience, you can isolate certain things and report on how it performs against different assets or on different channels. When you combine different types of audiences, you get different results. So this is really important as well. When you're merging firmographic plus technographic, for example, and they're both meta match audiences, you'll get more people. It just pulls the people together, saying we want in one file all of these individuals. But if you're merging a firmographic LinkedIn native audience plus a technographic audience or any other meta match audience, this will further filter your audience. Both have use cases. It just depends on what you need. So for example, sometimes if I'm not getting the right reach for an EMEA audience, I will remove the country filters of a meta match audience and filter that with Facebook or LinkedIn geos. I found that to be pretty accurate. You're relying on, you use all of the data that we provide, but just filter it a little bit more accurately, I think, with the Facebook and LinkedIn native tools. These audiences are too small to use individually. If you have multiple audiences that are too small, I recommend grouping them. If any individual audience that is less than 20,000 people should be grouped, in my opinion. Unless you really want to pay a premium for CPMs, or it's really important that these people are segmented because of some messaging or a certain offering that you have. But if not, group it where you can. You'll save money in the long run. Moving on to retargeting best practices. So I think that retargeting should be part of every lead gen strategy on Facebook and LinkedIn. They are good audiences to use from a quality and cost perspective. To keep these retargeting pools fresh, invest in brand awareness campaigns that drive high quality traffic to the site. You might not want to do this on LinkedIn because LinkedIn can be pretty expensive for a brand awareness campaign, but I find that Facebook a lot of times has cheaper CPMs and CPCs than LinkedIn. So if you're not really getting lead gen out of Facebook, try driving traffic from there. Alternatively, run display campaigns through metadata. We can create high quality audiences through our partners at the trade desk and drive really good traffic to your site and keep those retargeting pools fresh. As mentioned before, use groups to refine retargeting audiences by geo, job function, or company size. So if I group a site visitors retargeting audience that looks at everybody that's visited your site in the last 120 days and combine it with a firmographic native LinkedIn audience, and I layer on the United States and HR as a job function, then I'm only going to be targeting, when you merge them, people that have visited your site that are in the United States and whose job function is human resources. So if you're getting a lot of students or unqualified traffic to your site, that might be a tactic that you can employ to just improve quality. I think it's worth also noting to create a retargeting audience that tracks your career page or any other pages that you don't want to, that people would visit that you don't want to serve ads to. I know sometimes you get students looking for work or people that are already customers going to certain login pages. You can always use retargeting to suppress. Now, moving on to some best practices about measuring performance. So, at the end of the day, we always need to measure performance. That's kind of the whole reason why we've built this platform, is to be able to measure and know what we're doing. I'm just going to go through now some of my notes of where to find audience stats and what I usually look for when reporting this. So, where can you find this? The report section, of course. Make sure to click the multivariate performance dropdown and navigate to stats by audience. So again, you go to reports here, stats by audience, and you can look at individual audience performance or grouped audience performance in that module. You can also go to the campaigns tab and then experiments and isolate audience performance by typing that into this, or by opening up the filter and typing the audience name in that section. You can see here all of the custom audiences are listed in the experiments. So if you just want to copy and paste and get data across all different ads for that one audience, it is pretty simple and visually appealing. All right. So I look at the same stats for audiences as I would for campaigns. Tell you similar things, but there's different ways to interpret it. So we're looking at CTR, CPC, CPL, cost per MQL, lead to MQL conversion rate, and pipeline value. I think at the end of the day, pipeline value is probably the most important metric. If you have Salesforce connected, if you have a good MQL scoring system, then lead to MQL conversion rate is always important too. I would say that like each one of these trumps the one preceding it, but everybody has different metrics, so it depends on you. Remember that audience size will influence cost. So if your CPM or CPL is too high, again, consider grouping. And if I'm getting redundant with a lot of that stuff, it's because it's important. A lot of times I'll hop into an account that's not doing so hot and their CPLs are crazy high and they're not spending enough maybe. And then you look at the audiences and they're, 1,500 people in it. You just won't be able to deliver that many impressions to 1,500 people. So also, before diving into metrics, ask yourself the following. Is what I'm segmenting worth reporting on? What do these results tell you about your overall strategy? Is it, at the end of the day, is your CMO going to really care about testing the C-suite audience versus the VP and director audience, especially if the messaging is all the same? Is it worth segmenting the marketing versus the operations audience? If you're using the same ads, then it will be more effective to group them. And you want to be able to just isolate what's important. So keep that in mind with the naming conventions. Are you willing to pay more for further segmentation? And what metrics do you or your boss care about? Use those stats to tell a story. A lot of these numbers don't really mean anything until you can conceptualize what's happening when someone interacts with the ad individually. So that being said, understanding some of the numbers. High CTR, or for example, high CTR and low FCR, form conversion rate. This tells me that the creatives are interesting, but for whatever reason, after they click, they're not compelled to fill out the form. What happened between them seeing the ad and about to submit their information to them then running away? Is your CTA clear? Maybe you're asking for too many fields in the form. Whereas low CTR, low click-through rate, high form conversion rate, this tells me that the messaging is resonating with some of the people, but not as many as we would like. Who are those people not engaging, and what are their pain points? How can we adjust copy that might resonate more with the people that are not interacting with the ads? Maybe it's just a color scheme thing. Maybe, if it's a low form or a low CTR for an audience, they just, it's like blue and white background and they just can't see the ad when they're scrolling through Facebook. On the other hand, though, who are the people that are converting? Who are those high form conversion rate people? Can we use more messaging to convert more people that look like them? Export the list of leads that you have from that audience and see if there's any trends in terms of job titles or company size, and work your way back and try to figure out why that it's working for them. Low CTR, low FCR. Are we targeting the right people at all at that point? Do we need to maybe include more people and cast a wider net? Maybe we just need to test entirely different creatives or assets. That is always a tough conversation to have. But at the end of the day, it's better to know that you have stuff to improve than to just, keep doing the same thing over and over again and not getting better results. So lastly, tips and tricks. So general tips and tricks, and if this is getting redundant, I'm sorry, it's just important stuff. Start broad. It's better to start with a wide funnel and remove people bit by bit than starting small and having already excluded people that might want to talk to you. You don't know until you know. I will always liken the new audiences that we create, and I'm just full of analogies, I'm sorry, but it's like having a big slab of granite, and in there, the perfect audience is your statue of David. You need to chisel away at it. But if you start with a really small pebble, you won't be able to get that statue. Also, there are many other third-party intent providers out there that we do not yet integrate with. We're trying to integrate with every single company in the world, but if you are getting target account lists from those companies, whether it's demand-based or 6 Sense or you name it, upload them to metadata. Those are high quality. You're paying for that data as well, and it's just a great opportunity to use it. Generate leads from those lists. I've heard great things from 6 Sense lists, and I've uploaded many to metadata myself. For all MetaMatch audiences, again, really important stuff. That's why I'm repeating it. Use keywords, not full job titles. You can always exclude keywords that pop up frequently, but if it's just a long string job title, you're probably missing out on a lot of people that don't have that exact title. Naming conventions are so important. You need to name your audiences, really anything in metadata, something that you can report back on. So if you're not doing it yourself, tell your CSM if you have certain naming conventions or certain things that you need to be able to isolate by keyword, so that he or she can report on that later on. And lastly, if there's any niche industries might not be cited in LinkedIn or MetaMatch, just because those two, you have a select list of industries to pick from. I really recommend Crunchbase to almost everybody that is running niche industries. For example, recently running e-commerce audiences. There's no e-commerce industry in LinkedIn. There's no SaaS industry in LinkedIn, but in Crunchbase, you can use that to pull a list of thousands of companies that fit that criteria. If you don't already have a subscription, talk to your CSM about pulling those samples. So that is the webinar. Wanted to make sure that we left, 20 or so minutes for Q&A. I want to thank everybody for joining this call. First webinar I've ever done. Hope it went well. Hope it was valuable. And please send some feedback after if you have it. But let me just open up the chat. And all right. Is there anybody with any questions? Let me just go back. Here we go. When are you growing your mustache back? That's great. It's a good question. If you've been a customer of Metadata for a while and I've worked with you, then you've probably seen me with a massive mustache before. All right. Okay. Any chance Metadata will be doing anything on Twitter? Great question. We're going to scope that out, I think, in the next year. I know that we have, in terms of new channels that we'll be offering, we'll have LinkedIn conversational ads coming in, I think, just a few weeks. We'll have Google AdWords, and we're currently doing testing for Quora as well. So if you are interested in Quora testing, talk to your CSM about that. We can get you in touch with them. I think Twitter will be after those. So not for a bit, but we're always looking to add more channels. What are your tips for targeting our existing customers? Yeah, so if you have Salesforce, thank you for the question, Mary. If you have Salesforce, you can create an audience using Salesforce opportunity criteria or account type criteria. It's pretty straightforward, and I can actually, it might be better just to hop into the platform and show you exactly what I'm talking about. Well, otherwise, you can export a list and just upload it like you would any account list. Yeah, give me a sec. I just have to prove to the platform that I'm not a robot. So to target the target Salesforce audience, I go to new audience, one of these Salesforce accounts, do a new report, and then either by account type or opportunity stage. That would be your best bet. What do we have here from Mark? What's the most underutilized feature when it comes to building audiences? That is a great question. I think nowadays, or as of late, what I've been using a lot of, and I think people have found a lot of value, is doing the like retargeting refinement by groups. So when you take a firmographic audience, firmographic native audience, whether on Facebook or LinkedIn, taking a certain geo, like say you just want to target only people in France that have been on your site, you combine that geo with the native targeting with your retargeting, and you've got an audience that you don't have to go into in the channel and make any edits to. What else we got? Cool. Got 20 more minutes, a couple more questions. Right now, the lookalike feature within title targeting is for job titles that have generated leads. Will you ever be able to leverage that feature to target job titles that have generated pipeline or revenue? Yeah, I think if you have opportunities that have been influenced or triggered, you should be able to select from that list. Right now, I know that you can pull a list of MQLs, but it definitely will be available for sure. So let me just go back to sharing my screen here. So yeah, the job title lookalike, this is for a firmographic audience. You'll note here that you can choose from all job titles with MQLs, job titles with influenced ops, or job titles with triggered opportunities. Yeah, sometimes our own employees don't even know the full power of the platform. They keep sneaking in updates every once in a while, and they're always great updates. Michael, can you lengthen the time so it doesn't automatically log you out so quickly? Metadata is too quick to bounce out. I will relay that to our product team. I feel your pain. From somebody who spends all day in the platform, I fill out that capture far too many times. I know that it's a security thing, so I don't know how much control we have over it, but I will relay the information. I'm sure everybody has the same pain point. Cool. Keep it open. If you got questions, keep asking them. About 15 minutes left, and I'll be hanging out the entire time. So, you could just watch me drink water if you got no more questions. No problem, Michael. Thanks for joining. Thank you for joining, everybody. It really means a lot. Yeah, so Logan mentioned suppression list best practices for career page retargeting, or deals from closed won deals from Salesforce. The audiences that you would create for your target account lists, you can use the same way for a suppression list. Again, it's just how you name things that'll be really useful for when you're building these campaigns. So if you have a closed won list that you're creating from Salesforce, and that's a list that you want to suppress, when you name the audience, call it suppression closed won. That way you can just search quickly for all suppressions and add that to any campaign that you have. For your like a career page retargeting thing in the channel itself, that's where you have to name those audiences, name it suppression or exclusion or whatever keyword that you're using, so that you know this is not a good audience to use. If you got any other questions about that specifically, Logan, let me know. And also, when you're doing retargeting pages, say you have multiple domains that you want to exclude, build all those domains out within the same retargeting audience in the channel, and don't do one specific audience for career pages and one specific audience for login pages. This is because when you group those audiences in metadata, it'll end up filtering too much, and you'll have an audience that is only excluding people that have met both criteria. So that wouldn't be a lot of people. So yeah, always put all those links together in the same audience in the social channel. Right. Another question: is there a particular number of audience lists we should create? Also, how often should we refresh these lists, intent, new accounts, etc.? Great question, Chris. There is no set number of lists that you should be using. It again depends on what you want to report on, what you want to spend against, and like if you want to test one account list versus the other, then you would upload two separate lists. If you want to make sure that your EMEA target account list gets the right amount of impressions and it's not getting swallowed up by your North America target account list, then I would segment those lists. You should be refreshing audiences, especially ones that are, dynamic ones you don't need to refresh. That's the beauty of a dynamic audience. But for everything else, you should be refreshing it every 2 months, I'd say, is plenty. Anything more than that, and I think you'll start to see some people that left their jobs recently that are no longer there, or you're not getting any new people that could be in the list. But yeah, every 2 months. Also, if it's a dynamic list that's changing often, try to use a Salesforce dynamic audience, because it'll create much less work in the long run when you have to manually upload lists over and over and over again. Any other questions? All right. Yeah, so we'll give it another minute or so. If nobody has any more questions, we can all get some time back in our day. But again, thank you so much for joining. It is like I'm kind of talking to the void, but that's okay. All right. So yeah, I think we'll call it quits here. But thank you everybody for joining. Reach out with any feedback. If you have suggestions for the next webinar topic, let us know. So yeah, whatever matters to you, we can talk about. Bye.